Let's be honest, as great as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise is, it's riddled with too many continuities and never quite settled on a single story or a single murderous, cannibalistic family. Yet, the family was always there. A deeply dysfunctional family that fed off the flesh of the unlucky, sure, but whether they go by Sawyer, Slaughter, or Hewitt, each iteration of Leatherface's family used the same recipe to cook human meat, and in this video, we're going to explore all 25 disturbing Leatherface Family Tree members. So I think it would make sense if I spent like a couple of minutes discussing just what exactly is up with the several family names in the Leatherface franchise, and then we'll explore the various members of each of these families. So the original 1974 film gave us the Sawyers. Leatherface, Drayton, and Nubbins lived in a decrepit farmhouse in rural Texas eating what, or rather whoever, wandered too close. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 brought in more characters like Chop Top, another brother with a metal plate in his head and a taste for scabs. Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 gave us Tex Sawyer and a young girl named Babby who was implied to be Leatherface's daughter. That version of the family even referred to Leatherface as Junior, which means that he had a different father figure than the earlier films had shown. Then came Texas Chainsaw 3D in 2013, which ignored the sequels and served as a direct follow-up to the 1974 original. In this version, Leatherface is Jedediah Sawyer. He's revealed to have a cousin, Heather Miller, whose real name was Edith Rose Sawyer. Now, she's inherited the family estate and eventually helped Jed kill those who destroyed the rest of her family, but if that wasn't tangled enough, the next generation absolutely and completely rebranded Leatherface's clan. Leatherface now lived with the Slaughters, aka Wilmer and W.E., and Wilmer's girlfriend Darla. There's no explanation for the change from Sawyer to Slaughter, but the movie with 2 Academy Award winners brought in government conspiracies and a vague reference to the Illuminati. Lastly, there's the Hewitt family, who were introduced in the 2003 remake and its prequel film. Here, Leatherface is Thomas Brown Hewitt and is raised by Luda May. So that's pretty much it. We're sure if you have any confusion or doubts, it'll all get taken care of in the rest of this video. So let's hop on in. But before we begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's begin. Drayton Sawyer, aka The Cook. Drayton Sawyer, better known as The Cook, doesn't get as much attention as his chainsaw-wielding little brother, but he's quietly one of the strangest members of the Sawyer clan. We don't know much about his early years, but odds are he worked at the old slaughterhouse in Newt, Texas, much like the rest of his family. By the early 70s, he'd opened up the Last Chance gas station, which is where we first meet him in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. No one calls him Drayton in the original film, and he's just referred to as The Cook or Old Man, but he knows that he's the older brother and wants to be a bit more in charge than the others, even if he doesn't always get the respect that comes with it. He's the type who talks like he's keeping the house in order, barking at Leatherface and Hitchhiker for being reckless, but when it comes down to it, he's got a few screws loose himself. One minute, he's chuckling at someone being tortured, the next, he's scowling like it's all gone too far. Toby Hooper even mentioned that Drayton might have multiple personalities, something that really comes through in the dinner scene where he bounces between laughing at Sally and grimacing like he's the only sane one in the room. But of course, he's not. Drayton does try to pretend he's above the violence. For instance, when Nubbins calls him out for just cooking while the rest do the killing, Drayton says, "I just can't take no pleasure in killing," as if that gives him some sort of moral high ground. However, in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Drayton pretty much becomes a part of the family and its murderous ways. He's more aggressive, paranoid, and ready to throw a grenade stuffed inside Nubbins' corpse if it means taking out a perceived business rival. Yup, a grenade inside a corpse. In the non-canon comics, things go further off the rails. Drayton casually jokes about eating kids because their meat is more tender. He even joins hands with Jason Voorhees for a bit, then tries to chop him up with a meat cleaver. He also sports an apron that says "Kiss the Cook," because of course he does. Oh, and he also appeared in the 3D continuity, much like Nubbins, who we'll speak about next. Nubbins Sawyer, aka The Hitchhiker. Nubbins Sawyer, better known as The Hitchhiker, is exactly why people are afraid of hitchhiking. I mean, you never know if the person you just picked up is gonna eat you, and we agree that it could go the other way around as well. Anyways, Nubbins is first seen in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a sweaty, twitchy stranger walking down a sun-blasted Texas road. A van full of kids feels bad for him and makes the mistake of picking him up. What follows is one of the most disturbing 10-minute drives in horror history. Nubbins pulls out pictures of his family at the slaughterhouse, talks about melting cow heads to make head cheese, then slices open his own palm with a knife. Before they can get him out, he takes a Polaroid of Franklin and asks $2 for it, and when denied, Nubbins burns the photo and slashes Franklin's arm. After being kicked out of the van, he smears a bloody handprint on it and basically tags it for his family to hunt later. It's eventually revealed that he's the brother of Leatherface and Drayton and the one behind the grave robbing mentioned in the opening credits. When Sally Hardesty ends up in their home, Nubbins lends his hand in the torture. He insists their withered grandpa be the one to kill her, but when that plan starts to fall apart, Nubbins fumbles, loses his grip on Sally, and she escapes. He gives chase with Leatherface and ends up being flattened by an 18-wheeler while slashing at Sally in the middle of the road. His story doesn't end there, though. In Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, the family reassembles Nubbins' corpse into what can only be called a puppet, which his brother Chop Top carries around like it's still alive. Drayton refers to him as Nubbins, and that's when we learn his actual name. His remains presumably go up in smoke when a grenade explodes at the end of the film. Later entries introduce other brothers like Alfredo, Tex, and Wilmer, who seem to borrow traits from Nubbins. One uses a camera, another hitchhikes, and one is into self-harm. Originally, Wilmer was supposed to be Nubbins, but actor Edwin Neal passed, so the character was rewritten. Robert Sawyer, aka Chop Top. Chop Top Sawyer, full name Robert Sawyer, made his first and only on-screen appearance in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, where he saunters in as Leatherface's lunatic brother and a man clearly fried from more than one angle. Played by Bill Moseley, Chop Top walks the line between comic relief and deranged killer, someone who's almost always rambling about Nomland and Vietnam flashbacks while scratching at the metal plate in his scalp with a heated coat hanger. And yes, he eats the scabs. That's where we're at with this guy. He's styled like a burnout hippie and talks about iron butterfly and napalm in the same breath. His skull is patched up with a steel plate thanks to what he calls a lucky gook with a machete, and he wears wigs to hide the damage. Interestingly enough, the said plate has its own weird story, and both Toby Hooper and Moseley say Chop Top could reach a special kind of high if he scratched just the right spot. Chop Top is believed to be Nubbins' twin brother, though that's never confirmed. He shares the same wine-stained birthmark, only on the other cheek, and the same general enthusiasm for violence. He missed the events of the first movie because he was serving in Vietnam, so by the time he's back on screen in the sequel, Nubbins is dead, and Chop Top's been handed the job of upping the madness. He drives a beat-up truck, torments radio DJs, and brings a mix of bizarre comedy and slasher menace that somehow works in that weird Toby Hooper way. Outside of the main films, Chop Top was set to return in All-American Massacre, a spin-off directed by Toby Hooper's son. The film was never released, but the plan was to show Chop Top in a psychiatric prison recounting the family's history during interviews. He was to escape after the interview and was supposed to start a brand new massacre, an all-American one. Bill Moseley reprised the role in the trailer, which is about as close as fans ever got. There's also a blink and you'll miss it reference to him in the 1991 Leatherface, thanks to the catchphrase "Lick my plate" that's spray-painted on a gas station. Grandpa Sawyer. Grandpa Sawyer is the oldest and the strongest branch in the Texas Chainsaw Family Tree, and naturally, he has a special place in the franchise. In the first movie, Grandpa is supposedly 124 years old, and everyone assumes he's dead until he starts sucking blood from Sally Hardesty's finger like it's soup through a straw, which is allegedly why he's still alive, at least according to Toby Hooper. So is Grandpa Sawyer some sort of vampire? Before he became the patriarch of a cannibal family, Grandpa worked in a slaughterhouse where he was known for being disturbingly good with a sledgehammer. Then machines came in, and the family legacy of butchering cows for beef turned into butchering people for human meat. By the time Sally arrived at their home in the original film, Grandpa could almost always be found on his rocking chair upstairs, but his grandkids still treat him like royalty. They haul him downstairs, slice Sally's finger open, and feed him like an old man needs to be fed. When they try to let him finish her off with a hammer, he keeps dropping it, and his clumsy swings are what give Sally just enough time to escape. He returned in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 and was now 137 years old and lived in a repurposed theme park called Texas Battleland with what's left of the family. He's still being wheeled out to do the honors, for instance, when it was time to kill Vanita Brock. In Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, Grandpa's reduced to a corpse in a chair, but the thing is, he was still being fed blood by his family. Mama Sawyer also spoke about an incestuous relationship with him because, of course, and let's be honest, incest is the least of these people's sins. Oh, and Grandpa Sawyer also makes a few prominent appearances in the comics. Grandma Sawyer. Now, not a lot is known about Grandma Sawyer, who is of course the wife of Grandpa Sawyer, and all that we know from the movies is that her corpse has been carefully preserved in the attic of the Sawyer Ranch. She's believed to have died much before the events of the first movie, but it's no surprise that the Sawyer family decided to keep her corpse. That's what they did with the other family members as well. Edward Eddie Sawyer. Edward Eddie Sawyer, better known as Tex, is one of the smoothest talking members of the Sawyer family, though the charm doesn't last long. He plays the main antagonist in Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, where he pretends to be a helpful drifter, but turns out to be just as sadistic as the rest of his clan. Tex first appears at the Last Chance gas station, where he and Alfredo put on an act like they're strangers. When Alfredo harasses Michelle, Tex diffuses the situation, but it's all part of the setup. Later, he pretends to be shot and killed, only to reappear that night, after which he basically forces Michelle and Ryan into an accident. Once Michelle makes it to the house, Tex captures her with the help of his young niece, who was actually Leatherface's daughter named Babby. Now, Babby's mom was someone from the Sawyer family itself, but we don't know who. Anyways, Tex gets into a brief fight with Tinker Sawyer over being called by his real name, Eddie. Benny, another crash survivor, shows up and opens fire. Michelle escapes. Tex goes after her but gets stabbed in the chest. He limps after Benny with a hatchet, but Benny soaks him in fuel and lights him up with a Zippo, ending Tex's run in a ball of fire. Heather Miller, aka Edith Rose Sawyer. Heather Miller, born Edith Rose Sawyer, first appeared in Texas Chainsaw 3D, but she had absolutely no idea about the fact that she was related by blood to one of the most violent cannibalistic families in the entire world. Raised by Gavin and Arlene Miller, Heather was a pretty regular girl, one boyfriend, one best friend, and went la-la about her life, but that changed when she received a letter informing her that her real grandmother, Verna Sawyer Carson, had died and left her an inheritance. So she packs up the car and heads to Texas with Ryan, Nikki, and Kenny. Somewhere between hitting a hitchhiker named Daryl and meeting a quiet old man named Farnsworth, Heather starts learning about her path that she didn't know existed, but we did. At the Sawyer estate, she's impressed by how big the place is. They make plans to stay the night. While she's in town, Bert Hartman, mayor and closet vigilante, tries to buy the house off of her, but she refuses. When the group returns, they find Daryl has looted the place and disappeared. That's the least of her problems, though, and Heather soon finds herself alone in the house. While Ryan and Nikki sneak off to the barn, Leatherface barges into the kitchen and saws through a human hand. Of course, Heather runs and he chases her. Heather barrels through the barn with the van, picks up her friend, and makes a break for it. But a few deaths later, Leatherface escapes and Heather is taken to the station, where she finally learns the whole truth about how she's a Sawyer. Her entire family was wiped out by locals after the events of the original massacre. At a bar, Farnsworth fills in the blanks. Bert Hartman, the same man who tried to buy the house, led the original attack. Heather runs again, but Bert's son, who is also a cop, captures her and drags her to the old meat plant. She's strung up until Leatherface arrives and sees a birthmark. He realizes that she's family, and if we know one thing about him, we know that he doesn't hurt family. Kind of like the Dominic Toretto of cannibal serial slashers. Anyways, he sets her free. Later, Leatherface ends up chained, headed towards a meat grinder. Heather kills one of the captors and tosses him the chainsaw. "Do your thing, cuz," she says. Back at the house, Heather tends to Leatherface, tries to remove his mask, but he refuses, and watches him rebury Verna. She reads the letter Verna left her, accepts her family name, and stays behind. Later, she even lures her adoptive parents back to the house so that Leatherface could deal with them. So yeah, blood runs thicker than water, and in Texas, it runs with a chainsaw. Loretta Sissy Sawyer. So Loretta Sissy Sawyer also appeared in Texas Chainsaw 3D and was the mother of Heather Miller, or Edith Rose Sawyer, who we met in the previous entry. Played by Dodie L. Brown, Loretta was in the house with Drayton and the other Sawyer family members when Sheriff Hooper arrived and asked them to give Leatherface up to the authorities. However, Bert Hartman arrived with a posse of angry residents who burned the Sawyer house down and everyone who lived inside. However, they spared Loretta and her baby, Edith. It was then that Gavin Miller, who was part of the posse, took Edith from Loretta. Gavin kicked the woman in the face, which killed her. That's how Gavin and Arlene Miller brought Edith to their home and gave her a place to live, a place without violence and with love, and the Millers raised Edith as their own. But as we mentioned earlier, blood runs thicker than water. Although Gavin should not have killed Loretta, he did have his reasons, we suppose. Do you agree with us, or do you have a different opinion on how we see Gavin's actions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Verna Sawyer Carson. Verna Sawyer Carson was the matriarch of the Sawyer family, but she wasn't really the one who baked pies or kept the porch light on. She basically ran the Sawyer clan, or a cult that was the Sawyer family, and it was Verna who ensured that this cult made murder and cannibalism a way of life. And believe it or not, she stayed loyal to the bloodline until her last breath, so that's probably the only code that Verna had. She was mother to Loretta Sawyer, aunt to Jedediah and Nubbins, and grandmother to Heather Miller, who wouldn't find out about any of this until it was far too late. By the time the events of Leatherface begin, Verna's grip on the family was already iron tight. When Drayton kills Texas Ranger Hal Hartman's daughter, Hartman retaliates by having young Jed taken away and locked in a mental institution. Verna spends the next decade trying to bring him back. She marries Benjamin Carson, who is wealthy and well-connected, and she used her new position to file appeals, hire lawyers, and push through every legal door she could find. However, none of it worked, so she decided to storm the facility, set off a riot, and was ultimately dragged out, but not before Jed managed to escape. Once she learns where he's gone, she sends Drayton and Nubbins to deal with the deputy who leaked the info. Of course, they stab the deputy and feed him to pigs. She then gets Jed back, and it was Jed who would become Leatherface. Years later, after the rest of the Sawyers are wiped out and Loretta is dead, Verna tracks down her granddaughter, Edith. She keeps her distance for a while and only watches from afar as Heather grows up in a normal home. When Verna falls ill, she writes her a letter, and that's where the next chapter of the Sawyer family begins, with Edith and Leatherface working together. Jedediah Sawyer, aka Leatherface, from the 3D timeline. You see, most killers aren't born that way. I mean, look at people like Jason and Michael Myers, even Freddy Krueger for that matter. All of these guys were victims of tragedies of one kind or another, often self-imposed, but still. Similarly, Jedediah Sawyer wasn't born a killer, but the thing with the Sawyer family is that it doesn't exactly raise poets or doctors. From the very beginning, Jed was expected to carry the weight of their way of life, which was all about baiting strangers, butchering them, helping them to prepare what came next. Even then, he hesitated. The chainsaw terrified him, and killing didn't come easy, not until the world pushed him to the edge and left him with nothing but rage and bone-deep scars. In 1955, Jed was still a boy when Sheriff Hal Hartman had him committed to a mental institution after the death of Hartman's daughter, Beth, which was basically an accident set up by the Sawyers. Jed stayed locked away for nearly a decade, forgotten by his family, with the exception of Verna, but the institutional walls reshaped who he was. He became close to another patient named Bud, who was more brother than friend. They escaped together in 1965, along with a nurse named Lizzie, who they took hostage. Unfortunately, this brief taste of freedom ended violently when Hartman caught up to them and shot Jed in the face through his mouth and jaw. The wound left him unable to speak and permanently disfigured. Verna found him soon after, thanks to a bribed deputy. Back home, she tried patching up his face with stitches and a harness, but all of that only meant that Jed was unrecognizable, both physically and emotionally. When Hartman ended up tied to a chair in their living room, Jed didn't hesitate this time. He picked up the chainsaw and ended the man who had destroyed his life. When Lizzie ran, he chased her down. She called his mother insane, and he took her head in response. Jed used Lizzie and Hartman's remains to create his first mask. From there, Leatherface was born. Whatever was left of Jed, the hesitant boy, the quiet teen, it had all pretty much slipped away with the stitches. By 1973, Leatherface had fully regressed into a childlike state. He obeyed his family, feared their anger, and lashed out only when provoked. Decades later, in 2012, Leatherface lived in near total isolation. Time had hardened him, and by now, all the meekness was gone. He would kill without an ounce of doubt or hesitation and skin the faces of his victims. Clarissa Sawyer. Now, Clarissa Sawyer is pretty much the root of all things. You see, she had an incestuous relationship with her son Drayton, which is what led to the births of Hitchhiker and Leatherface. So, in the 3D continuity, Drayton, or the cook, was basically Leatherface's brother as well as father. Bear Sawyer. Bear Sawyer, played by David Bell in Texas Chainsaw 3D, appears in the very beginning. He was Grandpa Sawyer's son and the brother of Boss Sawyer. In the end, he's burned to death in the movie. Boss Sawyer. Boss Sawyer doesn't get much screen time in Texas Chainsaw 3D, but in the brief moment he does appear, it's clear he's the one holding the reins. Played by Gunnar Hansen, the one who also played the original Leatherface, Boss was the head of the Sawyer family in 1973, at least until before the entire house went up in flames. When Sheriff Hooper shows up at the Sawyer property demanding Leatherface be handed over, Boss tries to avoid bloodshed. He was calm, measured, and ready to play it smart. However, Drayton was not cool with what Boss suggested. He insists they don't give up family, but Boss simply points out that Leatherface isn't exactly boy a full deck and says flatly that the boy ain't right for a Sawyer. Drayton folds, and Boss calls out to Hooper, saying they'll send out Jed and asking that he get a decent lawyer. For a second, it looks like the house might not go up in smoke after all. Then Bert Hartman and his vigilantes arrive with rifles and Molotovs, and everything spirals. The mob opens fire. The Sawyers shoot back, but they're outnumbered and outgunned. Boss is among the first to fall. When the fires die down, his body lies somewhere beneath the wreckage. For Gunnar Hansen, this was his final return to the franchise that started it all. After playing Leatherface in 1974, he came back 4 decades later to play the man that started one of the best slasher franchises. So these were the Sawyer family members from the original and 3D continuities, but you know what? Apart from the Sawyers, we also have the Slaughter and Hewitt families. However, by most accounts, the Slaughter family is more or less the same as the Sawyer family with a few changes, and the name change from Sawyer to Slaughter can be attributed to the fact that they appeared in Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. We don't see the point of exploring all the members of the Slaughter family because we'd just be repeating ourselves, but we will remind you of one character, Wilmer Slaughter, who was played by an industry legend named Matthew McConaughey. Wilmer Slaughter. Matthew McConaughey's Wilmer Slaughter was someone who didn't hide behind masks or keep his madness quiet. This guy was loud, erratic, violent, and somehow still more terrifying than Leatherface ever was. While Leatherface chases people with a chainsaw, Wilmer talks and taunts and laughs, and sometimes he burns someone alive just to make a point. He walks like a broken machine, jerking around with the help of a bizarre leg brace rigged together from hoses, wires, and whatever metal junk he could scavenge. He controls it with remotes that he keeps in his pockets like a TV junkie who's one step away from rewiring himself into the furniture. No one really knows how he got that injury, though his brother, W.E., casually mentions that he's been shot and run over more than once. Wilmer's lived through things that should have left him in a grave. Instead, they left him in charge. In Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, we see him for the first time after a car accident where his girlfriend and occasional punching bag, Darla, calls him to check out the wreck. Sean, one of the unfortunate teens, watches Wilmer examine an injured passenger. The guy was breathing, but Wilmer decides that's a problem, so he snaps his neck on the spot. He's dead now, he mutters, and then runs Sean over with his tow truck. Not once, but several times, as if making a point about commitment. Later, Jenny, played by Renee Zellweger, because every horror franchise needs to accidentally cast multiple future Oscar winners, hitches a ride with Wilmer. He plays it cool for about 30 seconds, then he reveals the bodies of Sean and the other boy dangling upside down in his truck. Jenny dives out of the car while it's still running. He lets her run for a bit before someone else drags her back to the family home. There, between Leatherface's unpredictable tantrums and W.E.'s poetry quotes, Darla tells Jenny that this was not just some deranged family, but a part of something much bigger. Wilmer, Leather, all of them were puppets who were serving someone bigger than themselves, and their job was to terrify, torture, and traumatize. Why? Supposedly to satisfy some deeper, maybe even spiritual need. Darla claims they've been pulling strings for centuries. Assassinations, wars, you name it. She even drops the JFK reference, and sure enough, stenciled on Wilmer's tow truck is the word Illuminati. The film doesn't give much more than that, but a man named Rothman eventually appears, and he was all well-dressed, calm, and clearly in charge. Wilmer, who barks at everyone else, falls in line. Rothman isn't impressed with his methods. He reminds Wilmer that this isn't just about blood, it's about philosophy. Horror, he says, has purpose. But Wilmer's out here stomping heads and slicing throats like it's a sport. There's tension in the room that's never fully explained. Who is Rothman? Is he with the government, a cult, or something worse? Whatever the case, Wilmer listens to him, and that's rare, because Wilmer doesn't listen to anyone. Not Darla, who tries to soothe him while quietly flinching from his sudden outbursts, not his brothers, who mostly cower, and definitely not Jenny, even when she gets the upper hand. At one point, she grabs a shotgun and aims it at his chest. W.E. and Leatherface freeze. Wilmer grins, opens his arms, and dares her to shoot. Then, to everyone's surprise, he grabs the gun back and slashes his chest with a blade, smiling through the blood. He's the type who finds pain fun, which makes him harder to rattle and nearly impossible to stop. Eventually, Jenny breaks free and damages the controls in his leg brace. It slows him down, but it doesn't stop him. He and Leather chase her into a field, but then, out of nowhere, a low-flying, single-engine plane swoops down and decapitates Wilmer with its propeller. That's how it ends for him. Interestingly, Kim Henkel, who co-wrote the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, returned for The Next Generation, and he revealed that he initially wanted Hitchhiker back in the movie, but since the Hitchhiker actor, Edwin Neal, declined, Wilmer was brought to life. And Henkel also said that Wilmer might be a reincarnation of the OG Hitchhiker. He's a fascinating character, but now let's take a look at the final family, the Huitts. Luda Mae Hewitt. Luda Mae Hewitt is the kind of woman who would scold you for muddy boots while hiding a corpse in the pantry. She's not the first face you think of when it comes to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but in the 2003 remake and its 2006 prequel, she's the quiet backbone of the Hewitt family. She's all soft-spoken and polite and completely capable of murder, much like any self-respecting family member of Leatherface. Her story starts in 1939, barefoot and hungry near the Lee Bros meat processing plant. She was picking through the trash when she heard a baby crying, an infant that had been tossed out with the garbage, probably because this infant was born deformed and unwanted. Luda didn't give a flying duck about how the child looked, so she brought him home and named him Thomas. Her husband looked at the child and called him hideous, but Luda, well, she thought he was beautiful. 2 decades later, a school teacher named Mr. Hanson arrived at her house. He basically complained that Thomas wasn't a fit for regular school and needed special education. The reason he stated was that the boy had a habit of trapping and skinning animals, and it was only a matter of time before someone got hurt. Luda Mae listened calmly, showed him she cared, and once he was done talking, she killed the man with a shovel. When her sons returned, she told them to wash up for supper like nothing had happened. By the early 2000s, she was working at the Selle Community Center off Route 17, a dusty gas station doubling as a general store. When a group of teenagers stumbled in after a suicide in the back of their van, she smiled, offered to call the sheriff, and phoned her son Charlie instead. She told the kids the sheriff would be busy for a few hours and suggested they bring the body to the Crawford Mill. When they hesitated, she shrugged and said, "What you do is your own business." Later that night, when her niece Henrietta brought in a kidnapped child, Luda cooed over her like a grandmother admiring a new baby. When a bloodied woman was picked up on the highway and brought to the store by a trucker, she came out front to handle the situation, calm as ever, while Charlie took care of what needed doing out back. However, she's one of the few in the family who seems genuinely disturbed by all the cannibalism in the house. Not enough to stop it, of course. She's more like someone who would rather not be reminded of what's in the stew.
My money says your dead body's right there in that van.
Charlton Charlie Hewitt. Charlie Hewitt Jr., or as most people know him as, Sheriff Huitt, was not a real man of the law, but you gotta agree that he played the part super convincingly, so much so that he often got away with murder. If the Hewitt family, in the reboot timeline of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was a death truck of cannibalism and murder, Charlie was pretty much the engine. Before any of this, Charlie was a soldier. In the Wildstorm comic called Huitt by himself, we learn he fought in the Korean War. Captured by enemy forces, he watched as fellow prisoners were tortured and starved. Then came the cannibalism. Guards were butchering the dead and feeding their remains to the living. While most people would feel like throwing up at the sight of eating humans, Charlie was not most people and he salivated. Anyways, later on, he killed the Korean officer with a sharpened bone and the guards with a stolen rifle. Whether he freed his fellow Americans or ate them remains unclear, but we know for sure that he left that camp with a taste for human meat. Years later, in 1968, he shot Winston Huitt, the last sheriff in Travis County, because Winston was trying to arrest his brother Thomas for murder. After this, Charlie took the man's identity, uniform and all, and became the new sheriff in town. So, while the Hewitt family filled their freezer with human meat, no one questioned it.
Bring it. Bring what? Bring it!
Montgomery Monty Hwitt. Montgomery Monty Hwitt is definitely less brutal than Huitt and less monstrous than Leatherface, but there's no denying that he's crude and cunning in his own special way. Played by Terrence Evans in both the 2003 remake and its 2006 prequel, Monty was close enough to the others to know how things worked and what went around in the house. Back in the 60s, he drove a tow truck and likely helped fill the Hewitt estate with abandoned vehicles. In 1969, a biker named Holden shot Monty in the leg. Instead of rushing him to a hospital, Charlie handed the job over to Thomas, aka Leatherface, who cut off Monty's wounded leg and then took off the other one too, apparently for quote-unquote balance. By 1973, Monty was stuck in a wheelchair, angry and perverse as ever. When Erin knocked on the door looking for help, Monty let her inside but refused to let her boyfriend join her. He sent Erin to the phone, then lured her into the bathroom with a pathetic excuse about needing help up off the floor. What followed is exactly what you'd expect from a man who had been living too long with no consequences. Erin left in disgust but later came back with her friend Andy. While she distracted Monty, Andy snuck around the house, but Monty caught on quickly, started shouting, and slammed his cane on the floor, summoning Thomas as if it were a dog whistle made of oak.
Oh my. Oh my.
Tea Lady. The tea lady doesn't say much, but with these murderers, that silence says plenty. Played by Kathy Lampkin in the 2003 remake and the 2006 prequel, she's referred to only by her habit of quietly sipping tea while the world around her falls apart. Whether she's a cousin, a neighbor, or something else, it doesn't matter because she knows what the family does and she stays close anyways. You'll often find her seated beside Henrietta or Luda May, calm as ever, while the rest of the town goes feral. In 1969, she was inside the Hewitt home when Dean, one of the unfortunate souls caught in the family's trap, shoved her against the door in a panic to block Thomas. She simply absorbed the chaos around her like she'd done it all before. Years later, when Aaron came pounding on Henrietta's trailer, bleeding and desperate, the tea lady was there again. Henrietta Hewitt. Henrietta Hewitt, played by Heather Kafka in the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, comes off at first glance as less threatening than her more visibly deranged relatives. But underneath the soft voice and trailer park hospitality is a woman fully complicit in everything the family does. She doesn't live in the main house. Her trailer sits somewhere nearby, tucked along the edge of the Hewitt property, and no one's quite sure if she's a sister, a cousin, or a distant in-law. In 1973, Aaron, who was bloodied, terrified, and desperate, banged on her trailer door asking for help. Henrietta opened it and told Aaron she was safe now, offered her tea to calm her nerves, and watched as the girl slowly realized she'd walked into another trap. The tea was drugged, and Aaron blacked out. Henrietta then handed her over to the bad guys. There's also the matter of the baby. At one point, Henrietta abducted a young child and claimed it as her own. Aaron later escaped and took the baby with her, but Henrietta never expressed much regret. And with that, we've only got one family member left to explore, Leatherface, from the 2003 remake continuity. Thomas Brown Hewitt, aka Leatherface. Thomas Brown Hewitt came into the world unwanted and buried in blood. Born at the Blair Meat Co. slaughterhouse in August 1939, his mother died during childbirth, and her boss, who was cold and impatient, tossed the disfigured newborn into a dumpster to rot, but fate intervened. Luda May Hewitt, a local woman scavenging near the plant, heard the baby crying and took him home. She named him Thomas and raised him like her own. Thomas grew up with a skin disease that left his face swollen, twisted, and difficult to look at. Other kids mocked him and adults avoided him. Of course, this affected Thomas, and to shield himself from their stares, he began wearing scraps of leather over his face. Eventually, he ended up working at the same slaughterhouse he was born in, under the same boss who'd tried to discard him like trash. By 1969, the factory shut down after a health inspection. When his boss and a co-worker forced him out with insults and slurs, Thomas snapped. He crushed his boss's head with a sledgehammer and left the building with something new, his first chainsaw. When the local sheriff arrived to make an arrest, Thomas's brother, or uncle, depending on who's telling the story, Charlie Hewitt, stepped in and shot the sheriff dead. Charlie took the badge and the name Winston Huitt and used it to cover up the family's crimes. From there, things spiraled fast. Thomas, now called Leatherface, began killing anyone who strayed too close. He sliced off faces, wore them like masks, and helped feed the family. Unlike other versions of the story, this Leatherface wasn't tormented by his relatives. Charlie defended him, saying he was misunderstood, not slow. Still, Charlie also fed his rage and pushed him farther into violence. In 1973, after years of disappearances, a girl named Erin Hardesty managed to wound Leatherface and escape. Police found 33 bodies in and around the Hewitt home, but they didn't secure the scene, so Leatherface returned, killed 2 more officers, and vanished. That's mostly all we got for you this time, but if you think we missed someone, let us know in the comments section down below. Oh, we also wanted to mention the child, Jedediah Hewitt, but we think he serves better as a special mention, making him number 21 on this list. Then, at 22, we've got Babby, who appeared in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, then there's Tinker Sawyer and Alfredo Sawyer, 2 of Leatherface's brothers from the same movie, and their mother, Ann Sawyer, which is the last on our list, bringing us up to an even 25. That's all we got for you this time, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous night.